Hello everyone, Bag here. Right after talking about Saber, we next have our goated free unit, Archer, coming in the first half of 3.4. So if you want to know how to make use of this free, that's right, free, unit on your account, then this video is for you. Archer is a pretty unique carry in what he wants from his supports, due to how his damage is bottlenecked by his skill points rather than his turns. I'm gonna do a quick rundown of his kit, but if you don't need one then skip to this time. Archer's game plan revolves around his skill, in where he enters into a stance. This stance acts kind of the same as Castor's Dragon's Breath attack, in which using his skill, which is just a large single target nuke, does not end his turn, and you can use his skill repeatedly so long as you have the resources to use it. Archer can spam up to 5 skills in his turn before being forced out of his stance, where his turn is then forcefully ended. Otherwise, you can leave the stance manually, or you can be forced out of it when every enemy of a wave dies. This is pretty simple, but the catch is that each use of these skills costs 2 skill points. You want to spam as many skills as possible in one turn, as he has a stacking damage buff from the first 2 skills that lasts until the end of the turn. So the main crux in working around Archer is getting him as much SP to work around as possible, preferably as close as you can get to 10 SP per turn. If you're wondering how that's even remotely possible, well, he brings the team's SP cap up to 7, so that's a start, but other than that there are 2 main factors at play. For one, you can just give him skill points from other characters' abilities, which we'll get into later, or you can use his ultimate. His ultimate is a large single target nuke that gives him 2 charges. These charges, which he also gets 1 of per wave of combat, are consumed whenever an ally attacks an enemy, where Archer then launches a follow-up attack that recovers 1 skill point. His ultimate and other allies' ultimates can be used during his skill stance, so he can recover skill points mid-turn by having allies proc his follow-ups to generate skill points. The last thing to note here is that he gains the full 30 energy per skill usage, so his high ult cost of 220 is actually pretty fast to charge if you play your cards right. Alright, so he wants ways to support his SP, energy charging for more ultimates, and ways to proc his follow-up mid-turn. Let's see which characters can fit this bill. Okay, look, do we want to just rip off the bandage? I kinda don't want to do the whole waiting for 10 minutes to talk about Acheron and Cipher's teammate tier list thing. Yeah, let's not waste our time. Sparkle is by far Archer's most valuable support, and every other support has to be judged either as a lesser substitute or in how they can supplement what she brings to the table. For a carry whose main crux is their SP consumption, Sparkle being this vital is basically a given. She brings the max SP cap from 7 up to 9, meaning that if she skills Archer at full SP, he'll have an entire 8 SP to work with. That's 4 out of the 5 skills that he can do in one turn without any in-turn SP charging. And in that facet, Sparkle is also by far the best, as her ultimate recovers an entire 4 SP. So you can start Archer's turn at, say, 4 SP, that's 2 skills, plus Sparkle's ult is another 2 skills, and if you can then ult and get both follow-ups off, that's enough SP for the 5th and final skill. Or in a more optimal scenario, where you start out with 8 SP and a Sparkle ultimate, you can then spend 10 SP and have 2 left over to use for his next turn without even needing to use his ultimate. The flexibility that she brings here cannot really be overestimated, especially since her main weakness, which is her 50% action advance when compared to Sunday or Bronya's 100%, is not nearly as impactful here with how Archer's turn economy works. There are some other factors in play, such as Archer and a lot of his teammates being Quantum, which means that Sparkle's attack buffing trace is rather easy to max out. Her in-turn SP coming from herself and not through consuming his charges also again adds flexibility with how you can play around his SP. The amount of utility that you can get out of units who can consume his follow-up charges mid-turn is limited by the amount of charges that Archer can generate in the first place. Sparkle not relying on his charges at all to fill this role for him puts her utility in a completely separate category, giving yet another higher ceiling to how much SP you can give to Archer. Now, the thing is, Sparkle isn't that SP positive herself, as with a 3-turn ult rotation, she generates 4 SP while spending 3. So her main strength is in giving that 4 SP all at once during Archer's turn, rather than being some SP generating machine. You'll still need the rest of the team to actually generate enough SP for Sparkle and Archer to work off of. So while she is incredibly important here, the rest of the team can't be completely ignored. If you want my opinion, no. Not having Sparkle doesn't mean Archer is useless on your account, but she is the most noticeable single upgrade that you can give him. This is also especially true if you give her Sunday's Light Cone, as that's yet another extra skill point with every other skill usage, while then also giving her some very useful energy as well. This part isn't required, but it is another nice bonus if you have Sunday's Light Cone lying around. So in all, congratulations Sparkle for finally having your day in the spotlight. All it took was for Hoyoverse to remember that SP was an actual mechanic that carries can revolve around. But say you're like me, and you You lost your Sparkle 50/50 back in 2.0, and your dedication to Archer does not extend to pulling for a year-old unit in the big 2025. What are your alternatives? Sunday is a very usable option in a hyperspeed setup, in part due to how he's technically on par in SP positiveness with Sparkle, assuming both of them hold his light cone. In that context, she generates on average 0.83 SP per turn, while Sunday's SP per turn largely depends on his ultimate usage, since he can proc its passive with his ultimate and skill as opposed to Sparkle, but it should be close enough to be comparable. Sunday skilling Archer after his ult buff is applied to him means that he gives 1 SP back afterwards, or 2 if his light cone also procs, meaning that he doesn't have Sparkle's problem of spending SP to give Archer a turn. An optimal Archer turn start with Sunday starts him with 7 SP, while a non-Sunday light cone turn start with Sparkle starts with 8, so in this context alone, Sunday isn't that far behind. But yeah, the main thing that wrecks this comparison is Sunday not having any way to generate in-turn SP, excluding his ult proccing his light cone, in comparison to Sparkle's gigantic 4 SP per ult. The other utility that Sunday has over Sparkle is his energy generation. 44 energy per ult is nothing to scoff at, and if it leads to an additional ult in a fight, then that's multiple skills worth of damage that also then leads to more skill points. The problem with this comparison to Sparkle is the fact that, as we noted before, every Archer skill generates an entire 30 energy. So if Sparkle lets Archer skill more, then that's its own method of energy generation for him as well. I should also note that you can run Sunday in a -1 speed setup with Archer, where Archer basic attacks, gets action advanced, and then skill spams. This allows for a lot more SP generation in exchange for losing out on attack boots. From what I can tell, it's a perfectly valuable playstyle, so if you have cracked speed boots and terrible attack boots, then go wild, I guess. In a role reversal from what's typical, Sunday is a very usable alternative to Sparkle here, but there is no replacing the top dog in this position. I am inclined to mention, lastly, that Sunday does have a cleanse, and his 100% action advance can be helpful if enemies turn delay Archer, but these factors don't really do too much to tip the scales. He will be in the S tier, but as you'll see, he'll end up at the opposite end of it when this video is over. The next unit to talk about is the other big underdog name that's been making the rounds in Archer discussions, Hanya. Hanya is unique in basically being a 4-star version of Sparkle, with her main utility lying in her SP generation. For those of you who need a refresher on this unit that you've probably never used, Hanya's skill applies burden onto an enemy, and every 2 attacks onto the burdened enemy generates a skill point. This can happen 2 times, where burden is then removed afterwards. So here's the thing, like Sparkle, Hanya is not actually that insanely SP positive in isolation. She spends 1 SP to skill, and by the time burden is over, it generates 2 SP, making for a net +1 SP per turn. That's the same net SP generation as if a support just basics every turn, but of course her real utility comes from the fact that this SP generation can be gained mid-turn. This can be awkward to play around, since anyone on the team can whittle down burden in between Hanya applying it and Archer consuming it. With how fast you want Hanya to be, and how slow your Archer naturally is even after her speed buff, it might be impossible to not consume burden stacks before Archer's turns, if your supports have no other enemies to attack. Another nice thing from Hanya is the speed that she gives with her ultimate, as it can help give Archer 2 turns per cycle, which is the same amount of turns for him when compared to a normal hyperspeed Sparkle or Sunday. You'll probably need some DDD help as well, as the speed tuning depends on how early Hanya can ult in the fight, but it is possible for her to compete in this aspect, and I think that's pretty cool. From what I've seen, Hanya is a close 3rd place in this first supporting slot position. I think it's fair that if Sunday is at the bottom of the S tier, then Hanya deserves to be at the very top of the A tier. A plug here to subscribe. A teammate tier list for Finon should be out the day after this video is posted, so stick around if you want that kind of coverage. Alright, back to the vid. Man, it's been 9 minutes and we've talked about 3 units. Let's speed things up. Bronya is lesser Sunday here, where her weaknesses with SP are even more pronounced than usual. While an E1 S1 Bronya can be relatively okay SP wise, she is generally SP negative with worse buffs. She is kind of usable, but well, you wouldn't use Bronya with Dill, would you? And well, maybe you would. Anyways, this brings an end to the first slot of Archer's team. In my opinion, you should probably be using one of these 4, or really 3, units in any of your clears. For the far larger category, let's go into the secondary support. This slot is mainly focused on damage amping, SP generation, and conditional team-wide utility, aka DDD. Pela is a good generic example here, being purely SP positive with some good damage amping, a damaging ultimate that can proc Archer's follow-ups, and no real downsides. It is worth noting that with Archer being Quantum, he can run the Genius set pretty well, which then makes Death Shredders perform better than normal. So Pela really isn't that bad here, just not too amazing. Ruan Mei, as always, always provides better damage amping, is a bit more SP intensive, but she can make up for that second part if you have her signature. I'll be placing her above Pela purely for the utility that she brings in Apoc Shadow. Archer actually does some really respectable toughness damage with his skill spam, so in the fights he can work in, Ruan Mei brings standout utility. Jiaoqiu is then below Pela, as he is rather skill point reliant to keep his field up, including a turn 1 skill to get it online in the first place, while his buffing is good, but not really that made for Archer in general. Yukong, no. This might be the worst anti-synergy I've ever seen in the game, so let's move on. Asta, no. He's already oversaturated in attack buffs with Sparkle or Hanya, and she can be a bit needy for skill usage for perfect uptime of her ult. Harmony MC and Fugue are a bit higher than normal, since Super Break Archer is a thing. Not a thing I would recommend, but I wouldn't call it D tier, I guess. For the sake of the length of this video, do I have permission to just put every non-notable sustain in their respective tiers that I always put them in? Use each of them if you have to, but I don't really see many situations where you would, since, well, Archer's best sustain is Gallagher's, spoiler alert. Special notice to Lynx and Fushuan for being able to fulfill Sparkle's quantum attack buff passive, but that doesn't really bring him up past a B tier. Right, now more of the list is filled out, let's get back to some of the fringe B/A tierers. The last unit in the B tier actually is Robin. Robin is an interesting case, where at base, she is an SP black hole. Bronya's light cone can make her wave 1 performance SP neutral-ish, but in any context, she isn't generating the SP Archer needs. More turns given to the rest of the team can mean more SP, however, so I guess in a way she can contribute. I think the obvious thing to say here is that his playstyle is just not made with Robin's utility in mind, and in all likelihood, your other team that you're running is going to be able to utilize her a lot better than here. Usable? Sure, but not even close to her best showing. Tingyun is up next, with a decently strong showing here for the usual reasons. DDD is king, she's pretty dang SP positive, especially since Archer doesn't burn through her skill turns as fast as the average carry does, and her energy generation means more ults, which is one way to get more SP. 27% of his ult charge per Tingyun ultimate is pretty good, and again, if it means an entire extra ult compared to someone like Pela, then Tingyun is the stronger choice between the two of them outright. Of course, no in-turn SP and a non-damaging ult means that her Archer specific support is a bit lacking, but as a generalist supporting fill option, she's genuinely pretty usable. I do also want to note that she is pretty good at using Sunday's Light Cone, with her skill and ultimate being a single target buff, so if you, for some reason, have it lying around, then she does become a pretty damn good SP battery. And with that, the only non-S tier units to go over are the semi-notable sustains. Hyacine and Huohuo, despite having genuinely great utility, both suffer from their SP usage, as even an initial SP use at the start of the fight can make his first wave clear that much more shaky. Aventurine is pretty decent here with his single target damage amping, synergy with follow-ups, and damaging ultimate, and well, really the only thing working against him is that, well, he's not Gallagher. Yeah, Gallagher really just checks all the boxes here, huh? Uber SP generation, a damaging ultimate, energy generation with quid pro quo. He's a case where his utility is usually good on the team, even when it isn't specifically catered for them, and here, well, his utility is specifically catered for Archer. In any case, Gallagher is the other teammate that you'll see used with Archer 99% of the time, alongside Sparkle. We've seen some B to A tier options for this final slot, but the rest of the video is all about the final heavy hitters. First up, Tribbie, who is obviously worse than normal here due to Archer's single target nature being worse for Tribbie's additional damage and energy. Still, at base, Tribbie's buffing is supremely valuable, and thanks to her follow-up, she can provide her in-turn damage for Archer in 2 different ways, thanks to her follow-up and ultimate, with her follow-up automatically being sent out right after Archer gains his charges. This, plus of course DDD, gives her a very strong floor of value, but she is more susceptible to being outclassed here than normal. RMC is next, for having very consistently strong buffing with their true damage, and a semi-frequent action advance. Mem's charge for the action advance works very well with Archer's fast energy generation. I mean, 5 Archer skills equals 15 Mem charge, which helps make up for the fact that you won't want to skill with RMC past their first turn. That first skill use is pretty bad, but it's made up for by how you can use these Mem action advances. Since you don't need that many turns with Archer to get the most out of him, it's pretty common to waste turns that aren't fully set up, which will be a lot of the Mem action advance turns, just basic attacking, which means extra SP, extra energy, and a somewhat decent amount of damage. On the other hand, if you do need the extra turns from Mem to clear within the cycle, then Mem can still fill that role in the same way as she does for other carries, just with the added consideration that you need to plan ahead of time with his SP. Other than that, they have a damaging ult, and their true damage gets maxed out with Archer's energy being over 200. So yeah, a very workable 4 4th teammate, just not quite the best. I should also mention the downside that this is the only S tier 4th slot teammate that's not Quantum, for the sake of Sparkle's attack buff. But in the grand scheme of things, that's not the absolute end of the world. The final 2 units then are the very contentious and hotly debated Silverwolf and Cipher. Let me just quickly run through each of their pros and cons. Silverwolf at base provides generally better damage amping, and her Death Shred is able to beat Cipher's vulnerability with the help of the Genius set and her Quantum implants. This gap gets massively widened when against non-Quantum weak enemies, where Silverwolf's extra 20 res pen makes her the best in slot basically always. She also has a damaging ult and is SP positive, as her typical 3-turn rotation is skill basic. Her main negative here is that she has to use her skill like on any consistent basis, so while she is SP positive, she does lose to RMC and Cipher in net SP generation. There's also the downside with debuff uptime, where Cipher has no struggles with this at all, outside of whatever light cone she's using, but with Silverwolf you do have to be consistent with keeping her debuffs up, which can be difficult since implants wear off between phases of boss's health bars. Cipher, while providing less damage overall than Silverwolf, may be able to make better use of this damage with her damage accumulation. If Archer can kill an enemy with either of Silverwolf or Cipher's base damage amping in the same amount of skills, then the extra damage amping from Silverwolf is overkill, but Cipher's true damage is able to be stored and reallocated for when that extra damage actually matters, which can be especially useful with her ability to take Archer's single target damage and reapply it as a blast attack, weakening adjacent enemies so that less of his very committal resources have to be used on them. As mentioned earlier, Cipher is also purely SP positive. Skilling does nothing here besides a small self-damage buff and extra energy, which is a lot less to lose compared to not skilling with Silverwolf. And lastly, Cipher does have an out-of-turn attack with a follow-up, but saving this to be used within Archer's turn while consuming charge is basically impossible. So Silverwolf actually wins out in the charge-consuming category, since Cipher's ult is a lot harder to use for a scenario like this. The TLDR is, against non-quantum weak enemies, Silverwolf is massively better. Against quantum weak enemies, it's a situation where Silverwolf does more damage, Cipher generates more SP, and with very optimal play, you might get more use out of her damage accumulation rather than Silverwolf's marginally better damage. The SP factor is what's making me put Cipher at the top here, but honestly they are rather interchangeable. So yes, Cipher teammate tier list, you are outdated, and this will likely be doubly true with Finon's teammate tier list. All I can say is, my bad. And with that, that's the list. Archer is a very unique carry with how he interacts with his supports, and it's nice to see more niche units get their flowers. Once again, expect the Finon teammate tier list tomorrow, followed by guides for the 3.4 units. Until then, I hope you all have a good rest of your day. Bye!